The biggest game of the weekend, Liverpool against Chelsea, 4:30 kickoff on Sunday. Liverpool made it 6 wins in all competitions since their shock defeat to Forest at home, after most recently beating Crystal Palace. They've conceded 3 goals in those 6 games, but I think it's worth noting that they have been conceding chances. They're obviously a lot stronger defensively under Arne Slot than they were under Jurgen Klopp. They're a lot more controlled in their approach, but they're not as strong as the current numbers suggest, I would say. And I think we are due a sort of regression. Chelsea have also been in great form, unbeaten in 7, and they were held to a draw last time out against Forest at Stamford Bridge. Unable to sort of get the decisive goal despite Forest being reduced to 10 men in the 75th minute. In terms of the injury report, sort of most notable change for Liverpool will be Alisson out. Obviously, he injured himself against Palace. Kelleher also missed that game due to a virus, but you would imagine he sort of fills in for this game instead of Jaros, who did cope pretty well, I would say. McAllister is a small doubt. I think he came off at half-time in the previous game against Palace, but should be ready to start. For Chelsea, a bit more assurance in here with Cucurella and Fofana suspended, so they'll definitely be out. Reece James recently returned to training, but you would imagine this game has come too soon for him to start. Just before sort of going into any angles, I think it's worth mentioning that although this is the biggest game of the weekend and most naturally also have the most bets on it, I think it's a massive banana skin, and I would sort of advise you to be a bit wary with it. Here's why. So Liverpool have played just one team in the top half this season, and it was against Forest, who currently sit in 10th. I think it's undeniable that they've obviously looked a lot more composed, a lot better under Arne Slot, but this will be his biggest test of the season so far, and I think it makes the current data set that we have a bit unreliable to use. Same goes to Chelsea for an extent, who are missing key players. But again, excluding their sort of 2-0 loss to City at the start of the season, they haven't really faced a side as potent as Liverpool yet. So for both sides, we have to be a bit careful in how we interpret the data. With that being said, I have got one angle that I'm fairly confident in, and that is for Nicholas Jackson to have a shot on target, which is 1.8 with Paddy Power. Now, this is the same price with Bet365, but I would only take it if you have a Paddy Power account. Reason being is the super sub rule. So Jackson rarely finishes the 90, and Nkunku is his replacement. So he's an extremely worthy player to get onside here. But Jackson has landed a shot on target in every game so far this season, including against Man City, and Chelsea just haven't really struggled with chance creation at all. I think they've been very, very good going forward. They've looked extremely efficient, and Jackson has sort of been on the end of some really good chances. He did have a shot on target against Man City as well, so we sort of hit this in the toughest matchup of the season so far. Moving on to Liverpool, I think they did look a bit vulnerable against Palace. Obviously, Alisson and Jaros combined for 5 saves, so they can be got at. Did obviously mention that their defensive data can be a bit misleading. They've conceded the lowest XG, but again, sort of fixture dependent. But again, it's the super sub rule which here is key. I think Nkunku scored in the last time he faced Liverpool, so he will be confident returning back to Anfield. And he is pretty much always the replacement for Nicholas Jackson, sorry. So that's my first angle for this one. The rest are just sort of leans for now. I think they all sort of have value in their own way, but it's about how can you combine them and how can you make the most of it. So the first angle in mind is for Trent to make 2 or more tackles, which is slightly shorter than expected, but given that it's landed in 8 games straight and in 8 out of 9 games under Arne Slot, I think it's a really sort of nice price to take advantage of, given that he'll also have a good matchup against either Jadon Sancho or more likely Pedro Neto, 2 obviously quite direct opponents who will look to get at him. He's averaging the most tackles for Liverpool since Arne Slot took over, which is again a good sign, and I do think there's ladder potential given the matchup. Sticking on Bet365, Szoboszlai is priced at 1.5 to make a foul, which has also landed in 8 out of 9 appearances under Arne Slot. If we think into how Szoboszlai's role has adapted, he's still sort of playing in a more advanced midfield role, but you do see him sort of be a bit more intent on recovering the ball, sort of tracking back, and he is more aggressive in his press, I would say, which is sort of reflected in those foul counts. So he's averaging 1.39 fouls per 90, and I think he draws a good matchup here against the Chelsea midfielders Caicedo and Enzo Fernandez. But given his work rate, sort of tends to find duels against a lot of opposition players, whether it be the fullbacks, whether it be the centre backs, or even the wingers at times. So if he can sort of play somewhere near the 90, I think him to make a foul at 1.5 looks a really nice price. Sticking on a similar line of thought, Caicedo drew 3 fouls in both head-to-head games against Liverpool last season. The reason I mention this data, obviously, there's 2 new managers, so is it relevant? I think so, because the Liverpool press hasn't changed too much under Arne Slot. I think that's one of the common ground between Klopp and Slot has been the sort of intensity of the press. It's still very aggressive, and on a similar note, the role of Caicedo hasn't really changed too much as well from last season to this season, and I think that's reflected in sort of similar numbers for shots, tackles, fouls, etc. So I think it is relevant to use the head-to-head data in this scenario, and given that Caicedo to draw 2 or more fouls is 1.91, I think that's a nice price. It's landed in 3 out of 7 this season, but again, it's based on how Liverpool sort of press strongly, particularly in the midfield. Their midfielders, McAllister, Gravenberch, Szoboszlai, are sort of ranking with the highest total of fouls. So, I think ideal matchup, and 1.91 for 2 fouls drawn is decent, with ladder potential there. Another sort of sticking on the same line of thought with fouls drawn, Cole Palmer is averaging 2.62 fouls drawn per 90 this season for Chelsea, which is amongst the highest sort of average. Against Liverpool last season, he drew 4 fouls and 2 fouls. So to see 2 or more fouls drawn at 2.7 with Paddy Power looks a bit excessive on the surface. Again, really good data from last season. I think he'll be used as a sort of outlet for Chelsea. They'll look to get him on the ball as much as possible. He might look to drop deeper at times, and again, he should find the matchup of Gravenberch, McAllister, potentially even Szoboszlai and Konate at times. So 4 ideal players who are very aggressive for Liverpool and sort of commit high numbers of fouls. But yeah, as I say, all of those are sort of leans apart from the Nicholas Jackson shot on target price. We'll need to have a deeper look into this, and I will be having a deeper look into this. So stay tuned for a sort of expansive thread on Twitter. I plan to go into this one in quite a lot of detail. So make sure you're following me there on Twitter again. And that will finish off the Sunday bets.